We're going to start off with an illustration because the Bible has to connect to your real life. If the Bible just stays in the Bible, guess what? It's useless there. It only makes a difference when it starts to happen in real life. Okay, so here's the illustration. It's this kind of, it's springtime, isn't it? No, it's not springtime anymore. It's actually summer now. It was still spring when this happened. This was last week at Regent Christian Academy. Can I get a shout out for Regent Christian Academy? There's a number of us here who have been connected with that. Pastor Jason, who is up front on the worship team there, he's our worship pastor. He works at this school as well. You can see this is my son, Andrew, who will be celebrating among lots of other people today on Promotion Sunday. He's grade 6, moving up to grade 7 and youth group. And this is a game, a large inflatable, that I would love to rent if anybody wants to donate the money to rent something like this. It is called, can you guess what this thing is called? That's a good guess, knockover. It's called, most of the places that you look it up, it's got different names, but it's called Last Man Standing. Last Man Standing, okay? Because this thing is going to knock you down. Now, there's a few things. We're going to use this as an illustration, so there's a few things you got to notice about it, all right? First of all, notice that everyone is supposed to stand on a pedestal. Say pedestal. Yeah, everybody's standing on a pedestal. So, and the pedestal, like, it's an inflatable. So do you think it's easy to stand on the pedestal? Not super easy, right? Especially if it's not all the way inflated. That's what it was before this. There were some people who were trying to stand on it. It was partly inflated. Okay, so you got to stand on the pedestal. The second thing you're going to notice is that there is a large rod that's spinning around that's going to come knock you down. Does everybody see that? Yeah. It must be fun to be the guy controlling this rod. He actually can tell it how fast to go and send it backwards and forwards, knock everybody down. Okay, and the third thing to notice is this. How many people don't get knocked down at all? None. This is a carnival-type game that's designed to level everybody, all right? And in a carnival environment, that's a lot of fun, right? It's fun because you get up there and some people approach this differently, right? Like some people get up and they are really intense about it, right? Like I'm gonna win this thing. I'm gonna jump over this thing every time. I'm gonna put all my energy into it. Other people don't even try, right? Other people are like, whatever, it comes and hits them. They're like, oh, there's a rod there. But all the people end up in the same place, don't they? Boom, they just all get leveled. That's super important. It's really fun in a carnival because once you get leveled, then you're not trying to compete with people anymore. Now it's just fun and you can all have fun together. We're all on the same level. Now, here's where it starts to become an illustration for our message today. Okay? This is what life is like. Only it's not nearly as funny in life, is it? Some people are trying really, really hard, and they keep jumping back up on that pedestal, trying with every ounce of energy they have to not get knocked over, and guess what happens? Boom, they get leveled. Other people are not even trying. Guess what happens? Boom, they get leveled too. We're all in the same spot. That's going to be our key illustration. We'll come back to that a few times during the message today. Oh, it's so much. I almost don't want to click next because it's so much fun. We gotta rent one of these things, Last Man Standing. All right, we are in a series of messages right now in the book of Romans called Reclaiming the Center. What does that mean? Reclaiming the center of the human being, the center of life. What's at the core in a human being is what's most important. This was the consistent teaching of Jesus. It's not the stuff you do that's the big problem. It's what's on the inside. That's the big problem. And Romans is all about God's plan to take that center of human life back. Take it back from whom? Take it back from an enemy. Take it back from evil. Take it back from the place that it's fallen to when we turned away from God. So we've been going through, so far this series of messages has been super depressing, right? I think we're in week 9 right now. And probably like 7 of those weeks have been super depressing. Nod your head if you've been here and you know that's true. Because the beginning of Romans is just all about how bad things really are. In the world as a whole, in the human race as a whole, and in each individual life, things are worse than we ever could have imagined. When we really start to look at it, things are really, really awful. So we talked about, in Romans chapter 1, we talked about the free fall, right? When people disconnect, God is no longer the anchor. He's no longer the one that we're putting our trust in. We're going to try and do things on ourselves, by ourselves. The result of that is a free fall in an individual human life and in society as a whole. Things go from worse to worse. So we talked about that, and we talked about today's message. We're going to be in chapter 3, the end of chapter 3, Romans chapter 3, verses 19 through whatever the end of the chapter is, 27, 30. How to be good enough is what we're going to talk about today. And we talked about this point the last couple of weeks as we got through and we got to the end of that free fall, right? This view that Paul is giving us of just how bad things really are, okay? We talked about this point that everyone actually is so bad that there's no way we can fix ourselves. And that's sort of the bad news, right? But it's important that we are realistic. We've talked about that as well. Why do we need to stare the bad news in the face? Because until we accept it, we're not going to be able to go the right way. Until we face the problem. We talked about how it's like an alcoholic, right? Not everyone is an alcoholic, but everyone is something. Everyone is so bad on the inside that we cannot possibly fix ourselves. And so until we accept that fact, we're in big trouble because we're going to keep on trying to stay on the pedestal. Until we accept the fact that we all get leveled in this life and we cannot stay up there by ourselves, we're not going to be able to move forward. Okay, so today, before we actually read the text, the title of the message is How to Be Good Enough. And there's a problem in the book of Romans, a problem for delivering the book of Romans or communicating it to people today. And the problem is that Paul uses some words in the book of Romans that are very hard to translate into English. And the ways that we've translated them traditionally don't really mean very much to most people today. And one of the big words, and we've talked about it in a few different ways so far in this series, one of the big words is the word righteousness. What does the word righteousness mean to you? How many times have you used the word righteousness in a conversation? Probably never, unless it was a conversation specifically about the Bible. Now, the interesting thing is that the word that Paul's writing and the language he was writing in at that time, it was a super common word that everybody knew. So here's the problem for communicating this book today is we got this big word righteousness that's kind of in the way of us understanding the book because we don't understand what it means, okay? And actually, we have limited cultural resources to help us understand, but this is how I'm going to help us understand today. Righteousness means being good enough. All of us in this life face this question at some point. Actually, not just at some point, probably like every day, subconsciously. Every day growing up, we're talking about, the kids today, grade 6s moving up into youth group. We're talking about teenagers. I mean, think about how often you faced this question, maybe not in these exact words, but in your own mind as you were trying to become an adult. You were a teenager, you were a young person. Am I good enough? I know for me, pretty much all the time when I was a teenager, I felt that I wasn't good enough. We face this question. You think about times that you went to your parents when you were a kid. How often did you do something and then you wanted them to see so that they would tell you, you did it. That's it. You're good. You're the person you were supposed to be. We all have a built-in desire to be good enough, to be, I'm going to put it this way as well today, to be what we were made to be. We don't always think of it that way, but we have that built-in desire to be good enough. And yet we all know that in many different ways we're not. We don't measure up to what we should be. So as we read the word righteousness today, what I want you to think about is good enough. Okay? And what is the Bible saying about how to actually become good enough? To become on the inside really the person that you were created to be. What does it take to do that? We've already seen it's not going to happen by us trying to do it on our own. Right? So again, back to our illustration, the pedestal in that inflatable represents being good enough. Standing on that inflatable pedestal is being good enough. And who is able to remain on it when that rod comes flying around? No one. Some of us try really, really hard to be good enough, and we still get knocked down. Other people don't try. It's better to try, by the way. It's better to try. But it's not going to get you there. Trying hard to be good will never make you truly good. That's one of your points. If you want to fill in blanks in the notes today, there's a number of places that you can fill in the blanks if you're here on site. All right. We're going to read through Romans chapter 3, verses 19 to the end. And this comes in 3 sections. And the first section, what I want you to realize, what we're going to pull out of this is this point. The law comes in as a great leveler. The law, what you're going to hear the words the law in here as well as the word righteousness. And so the law, what is that? That's the Bible. It's the Old Testament. It's a book that actually has a ton of rules in it that the Jewish nation was given by God. They were supposed to follow these things. Okay? And Paul is going to argue in these verses that actually the purpose of God giving those laws to everybody was so that everyone would realize they couldn't live up to what they were made to be. The purpose of God giving the law was not so that people could actually succeed at it. They couldn't. The purpose was that everybody would get knocked down. The law is kind of like that rod spinning around in the last man standing game. So let's check it out here. Romans chapter 3, verses 19 to 20. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world may be held accountable to God. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. So the law comes in as a great leveler. All right, we'll just say a little bit more about this, right? So we're all trying to stay on the pedestal. We're all trying to be good enough, okay? And some people are trying really hard. Some people are not even trying. There are different strategies because as we try to be good enough, we fail in this life. And so some people have always tried to redefine what's good enough. That's one of the strategies that we have to justify ourselves, to feel okay with ourselves, right? So instead of, we realize that we aren't good enough, we try to be good and we fail at it, we get leveled. Our conscience tells us, I didn't do the thing that I should have done. What's the next step? What's the next thing that we do? We often justify ourselves. I didn't do the thing that I know I should have done, but it's not my fault, right? It's not my fault because I had to, because somebody made me mad, or because something bad was going to happen if I didn't do the bad thing that I did. We come up with ways to justify ourselves. And that's the situation the whole world was sitting in. Justifying ourselves, redefining what's right and wrong so that we could call ourselves good. So God chose one group of people out of the world. He did this thousands of years ago in the very beginning of the Bible. He chose the Jewish nation and he gave them a law. He gave them rules and he said, you guys have to live up to this. And what Paul is saying is that part of the purpose, in fact, the end goal of God doing that was not that the Jewish people would actually be able to do it. He gave them a law that said, here's what human beings were really supposed to be. You guys go do it. And I'm going to be with you and help you and protect you from the other nations around you if you do it. And so the Jewish people were kind of like the people on the pedestal trying really, really hard to do it. And maybe even who had some instructions from the owner about how to do it. And they still failed. And what Paul is saying here, this is kind of a complicated or deeper point, but what Paul is saying is that the purpose of that was to show to the whole world that no one can live up to what we were meant to be. The purpose of it, much like the inflatable last man standing, was to level everyone, to make everyone realize that we could never measure up on our own. Wow, okay. Now, I said this message wasn't going to be as depressing as the last ones. That part kind of was. Okay. The next thing is Paul begins to talk about the gospel. All right? And if you're not used to church language, gospel means good news, and it's a way of referring to the primary message of the whole Bible. The primary message of the whole Bible is the good news of how we actually can become good enough, how we can become righteous, how we can enter into a relationship with God and become what we were made to be. And so in the rest of this section, he gives us 3 steps. And he's going to go into detail about the gospel over the next 5 chapters in the book of Romans. So we're going to be talking about this quite a bit. But he outlines it in this next section in 3 steps. Let's read verses 21 to 26 here. So the law came in and leveled everyone, not even the people who God chose and specially prepared to fulfill the law, to be what they were made to be. Not even they could do it, which is supposed to show the whole world that we couldn't do it. So now, Paul says, apart from the law, separate, completely separate from the rules, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. So what he's saying here is that there is a good enough, a goodness. The goodness of God himself is being proclaimed to the world. And it's been predicted for thousands of years through the prophets that there would be some way that God's goodness would come to the world. We wouldn't be able to do it on our own, but somehow he would be able to give his goodness to us. This righteousness, this goodness, this being good enough is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile. So that is between the Jewish people, the people of God, and between people who are not religious or who had other religions. There's no difference because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All have been leveled. All have been knocked down in this life in the last man standing game because none of us could live up to it, up to what we were supposed to be. This is a very famous verse in the Bible, right here, verse 23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. If that's a verse that you've known in the past, let me see your hands. There's quite a few of us here. It's a very famous verse because it's the place in the Bible, one of the places, where what the Bible calls sin is equated to failing to live up, failing to hit the mark, failing to live up to what we were made to be. Sometimes, especially for people who don't go to church, non-religious people, think that sin primarily means doing a bunch of bad stuff. No, that's not primarily what the Bible means. Sin is an internal condition, and it's failing to live up to what God made us to be. Human beings, in the beginning, in Genesis chapter 1, we were made to do what? To be what? The image of God. We were made to be like God in significant ways, on the inside, to look like him, to have his kind of character. And we have utterly failed to do that. Instead of being selfless and loving, most human beings, almost all the time, are self-focused. Self-focused. We have utterly failed to live up to that, and that's what Paul is saying here. All human beings have sinned. We've failed to live up to the glory of God. We fall short of it. We've failed to live up to what we were made to be. We've all been leveled. But the righteousness of God is being offered to us through Jesus. This is what the cross means. He's about to talk about the cross a little bit more in a moment. It can be given to you as a gift, even though you can never be good enough on your own. You can't. It's not possible. You can receive God's own goodness inside yourself. That can be a reality in your life. In fact, for many of us sitting here today, that is already a reality. We have received it. All fall short of the glory of God, and all are, or can be if they have faith, All are justified, made good on the inside, made good enough, freely by God's grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement. We're not going to go into the details of this today. If you want to look back at our series, The Cross, that we did before Easter, we talked all about this in detail, what this means. This is how God set it up. This is how God made it possible for us to receive His own goodness inside of ourselves as a gift. He did it by sacrificing His own Son on the cross as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of His blood, and this gift is to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate His righteousness, that He's good enough, because in His forbearance, He had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate His own goodness, His righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. I'll just point out here, if you're lost at all or some of this is difficult to understand, it is. And there are problems here, difficulties in translation as well. The word righteousness, the word just, and the word justifies in the language that he wrote this in, they're all the same word. Those are very hard to translate in a way that we understand, and the word in those days was understood by everyone in the culture. So we've got to find ways to grab onto this. He did this, God set it up this way so that we wouldn't be able to earn our own goodness. He set it up this way so that His glory and how good He really is would be shown to the whole world. Because now nobody can earn their way into being okay with God or being good enough. No one can do it. But God is not only good Himself, He's not only good enough, He's also the one who makes all of us good if we're willing to trust Him. How amazing is that? Paul here is trying to show us a little bit more of the glory of God. Okay, so if we're going to put it into 3 steps, so we can understand it a little bit more clearly, because it turns out if we don't say things clearly, none of us understand what we're talking about. Number 1, here's how you can actually become good enough. That's what these 3 steps are. This is what the Bible is saying. You can't do it on your own. Number 1, if you want to become good enough, you have to give up and stop trying to be good enough. That is totally counterintuitive, right? If you are like me, who would have been the kid on the inflatable on the pillar there? Who would have been the one who was trying really, really hard to never get knocked off? Like, I would have been the kid who tried really, really hard, failed, then got off the inflatable and dedicated the next year of my life to learning how to stay on the pillar at the inflatable so I could win the next year. That's who I would have been. Seriously, I went skiing one time. My parents took me skiing. I was terrible at skiing. I immediately signed up for ski lessons as soon as I got home and spent the next 2 years learning how to ski because I was going to conquer anything. So some of us try really, really hard, but counterintuitively, we have to stop that. Think about this for a moment. I'm going to push the illustration a little bit further. Let's imagine the guy, there's the guy sending the bar around, knocking everybody down. Let's imagine that the guy who owns the carnival, the guy who owns this inflatable, his son, who grew up at the carnival, let's imagine the son shows up at the last man standing game, okay? And because he's grown up at the carnival, he's been doing this his whole life, and his dad is the one running the rod, right? That's like cheating almost, right? Because of all those facts, he's actually able to succeed at this game. So this kid shows up at, maybe this is at RCA, and he's the owner's son, the son of the owner of this inflatable, and he gets up on the pedestal, and he can jump over it every time. He can stay on that thing. All the other kids are amazed, super frustrated at why can he stay on it. Then he gets down from it and he goes around and he starts trying to help people learn how to stay on it and actually succeed. He starts trying to help Andrew and all his friends stay on the pedestal. Now, what things are going to get in the way of them learning from the owner's son? This. Yeah, pride. And this is pride, right? Never accepting that I can't do it on my own. I'm just going to keep on trying. I would have been the kid that refused help from the son of the owner because I'm going to do it on my own. And so some of the people who've been knocked off and have given up are actually in a better position than me, even though I'm trying really hard, because they realize they can't do it. Now, the ones who are totally don't care about anything, they're not in a good spot either. But the ones who have been knocked down and who have gone, wow, I wish I could do this, but I realize now that it's impossible for me to succeed at it. The depressed, the discouraged, the poor in spirit, the broken, the lonely, those who have depression and anxiety, often these people are the ones who are most ready to receive the help, the only help that can make them succeed in this life. Do you see it? You got to give up and stop trying to be good enough. I'm preaching to myself right now. Pastor Isaac, give up. Stop it. Number 2, you got to learn to trust and rely on God. That's what it means to have faith. Okay, it's another word that we read a bunch in Romans 3 there. We don't always understand. It sounds just like some sort of fairy tale word that happens in fancy buildings. Nope. What it means is to learn to trust and rely on God in a very practical way in your real life. Just like those kids, if the owner's son was there trying to help them stay on the pedestal, they would have to learn to trust him and rely on him. When they were starting to fall, he'd push them back up, and they have to not fight him when he does that, right? Learn to trust and rely on God. Number 3, receive God's goodness as a gift. The only way to be good enough is to accept that I can't be. Learn to trust and rely on God. And then, this is a very spiritual thing to do. It's hard to describe, but we have to receive the gift that he's giving us. We have to pray to him, ask him for it, and then accept the goodness that he is giving to us as a gift. We'll talk more about this as we go through this whole section of Romans about the good news, about the gospel. The final section will wrap up with this, defeating pride so we can see God clearly. That's the last point in your notes. I think they're second to last. This is the last section in chapter 3, and here Paul describes why God set it up this way, partly for his glory, so that it could be seen just how good he is, how full of love he is, but also to get around a trap that's been laid for us by our own pride and by Satan, who is our enemy. Let's read this here. Then what becomes of our boasting? What becomes of us talking about how good we are and what an amazing job we've done? It is excluded. We can't. By what kind of law is our boasting excluded? By a law of works? No, but by the law of faith. For we hold that no one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. What does he mean? Every other philosophical or religious system in the world is about doing good things and then achieving some goal. Okay? When you do that, you're still stuck in pride. When Christians do that, we're still stuck in pride. When we pray a bunch and give away a bunch of money or go to church a whole bunch and think, yes, I did that, so I'm good enough, I'm at that very moment, I am not focused on God. Who am I focused on? Myself. I'm still stuck in pride. What Paul is saying is God created a system, the only kind of system that possibly could have avoided that trap. We can truly become good by God's grace through faith in a way that gives us no reason to think, I'm so amazing I did it. We can truly become good in a way where the only glory, the only one who's really responsible for that goodness is God, not me. My boasting is excluded. And so I avoid the trap, and I'm actually able, step by step, over a long process, to become a person of love. Self-sacrificial love. That means thinking about other people, not just myself. Is God the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Yes, he's the God of the whole world, of all nations. Since God is one, there's only one God. He's the God who will justify the circumcised. Remember how we talked about this a few weeks ago? He's the God who will justify the baptized, Christians, and also the unbaptized, non-religious people, through faith. Anyone who comes to him and trusts in him will be given his righteousness, his goodness, will be made good enough because of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. Do we then overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. This is the message of the Bible. Only God's system of faith escapes the trap of Satan. All right, my friends, we're going to stop there for today. Come back next week and following, we're going to continue in this series through the book of Romans, taking a deeper look at what is the gospel? What is the good news now? We've seen how bad the world is. We're going to now see how God is working and what system he has put in place to restore human beings so that we no longer fall short of the glory of God, but that we could actually have God's own goodness living in us. Let's